Okay, so we're looking at pivots and aligning assets for Unreal exports. I have here a very crude house, a door, window, and flower box, as well as a fence segment. So we'll look at how to add the pivot to each of these objects, and then this is my human scale shape for reference. So let's look at the biggest object here first, the house. Right now, the pivot is in the center of the house. When we bring this into Unreal, if we leave it here at the center of the house, Unreal is going to bring it in, and half of your house is going to be in the ground. So we want it to land on the bottom. Obviously, we want the bottom to line up with the bottom in Unreal. So I'm just going to hit D on the keyboard to move my pivot point, and I'm going to hold V to snap to points up here and snap it down to the bottom center. I could snap it to one of the corners of the house. It would just mean that my house, like this, would be the main point. But for something like this, I'm going to leave it in the center. I think that that makes the most sense for me to like move it around in Unreal. But before we move on, we want to move the house to the origin of the world. So if we hold X on the keyboard, we can snap it down to our grid. And right there is the origin. So right next, we want to freeze our transformations. So I'm going to go up to modify, freeze transformations, and just to be safe, we'll delete the history. So from this point, assuming I had set up my materials, uh, we could export this single object. So we would just select the one house and export it from this spot. So next I have my door, and for the door, I'm thinking about where the door is going to open. I'm going to put it right here on this bottom corner. So D to move your pivot, and I'm going to hold V again so that we snap to that pivot point. Great, so then if I hit E, it's going to open like this. Not that we're animating or anything here. Ideally, if we were, you would have hinges and you would line up the pivot point with the hinges. But since we're thinking modularly and we are thinking about snapping this, we're going to try to make it the most easy to place. So when this comes into Unreal, this will be at the bottom. The door will line up, but now we need to move it to the origin. And we'll hit X and snap it to, again, freeze transformations and delete by type history, and then I could export this door. Let's move that. And then let's talk about the window. So in the web courses, there's a segment that says the mesh can float on purpose. If your windows, let's say, you know that you always want them to be at a specific height on your house. Um, actually, we can bring the house in. Okay, I sent it back 200 because I know my walls are 400, so if I wanted it to be halfway, because my pivot is in the center, I knew minus 200. Anyways, my window. So let's say I know that I always want my window to be, I guess let's first set the pivot here. So I'm going to hit V to snap to point, and then we'll get out of that mode and let's snap it to the grid just so I know we're lined up. Okay. So let's say that your windows are always going to be at this height. We could set the pivot to be down here at the origin. So then when we bring this into Unreal, our window is always going to be at this height. Your pivot will be down here, but that way you could snap to the grid in Unreal or to points on your other buildings and stuff. So you could do something like that, and that way your windows will always be at a specific height. Don't forget to freeze and delete your history. And then let's look at this flower box. Sort of the same thing. Let's say, this is something that is always going to attach to a wall, even if you're thinking of like a picture frame or something. We want it to attach on the back part. So I'm going to hit D again on the keyboard and V. I'm holding V to snap to a point. And you kind of want to be consistent, so I'm just going to choose the bottom part. So if I wanted to, I could put it right here in the center. I don't have a center line here to pin it to, so I'm just going to choose that back corner. And again, we would just bring that to the origin so we could export from there. Delete the history and export, freeze transformations, all that. Same thing goes for, let's say you have a fence and you just want to do a segment and then you'll repeat it a bunch of times. In Unreal, we want that to be able to snap together. So I'm going to choose that bottom corner again, D on the keyboard to set my pivot, V to snap to the point, get out of pivot mode by hitting D again, and if we hold X, we can snap to the grid. Okay, so from here, right, our pivot point, we're on the ground, modify freeze transformations and edit, delete by type history. So now this would always come in, where you expect it to on the ground. But when we want to like duplicate in Unreal, we can have these, snap together. I know that this is 100 long, so you could have repeating segments like that. You just need to, when you're thinking about something like this in modeling, you want to think about how they do fit together. So because I wanted this to be every other segment, that original one needed to be, pole and then space. Because if I had done it, if I wasn't thinking, I could end up being something more like this, right? And then you'd have a big gap here. So just thinking about your models and how they're going to fit together, but we would only need to export, this one segment so that we could duplicate in Unreal. Yeah, so that's about it, I think, for the pivots and setting them. Just think about what logically makes sense. Export from the origin, freeze your transformations.